Washington University, KETC, present Science and Human Responsibility, a conference called at Washington University in St. Louis to bring together men of thought from all parts of the world. These men are searching for answers to the problems that face us and for the best ways to use the opportunities that are ours in this scientific age. With Dr. Houston Smith, who is your representative in questioning the conferees. Dr. Smith.
Last time we were talking about the freedom of man. Man is the only creature for whom the real is fringed by the possible. Tonight we turn to the nature of man. Who is this creature who sits astride of this freedom? Well, the most obvious thing I think we can say and agree upon is that he is an ambiguous animal. We've seen vivid evidence of this in our own time. On the one hand, he has a tremendous capacity to reach out in concern for other persons. Here is a picture of mothers in Guatemala bringing their preschool children to receive free milk, which is being provided by the World Health Organization. Just a symbol of the way in which people can care for others across continents, across oceans. But at the same time, we've seen in our own day a savagery, a capacity for violence and destruction in man which has perhaps been unequaled in all history. Here, tragically depicted in the picture of Buchenwald. Who then is this creature who has these extremes latent within him? What is the nature of man? We need help at this point from a psychiatrist, from those who have taken man as the focus of their study. And we have with us one of the leading psychiatrists in the world today, Dr. Erich Fromm, also, I suspect, the psychiatrist whose writings have been read by more people in our generation than perhaps any other psychiatrist. He is widely known for his books, Escape from Freedom, Man for Himself, Psychoanalysis and Religion, The Sane Society, and his latest one now, The Art of Loving. Dr. Fromm, it's a joy to have you with us. And let me begin. As I ask you about the nature of man, you're going to be speaking as a psychiatrist, what psychiatry has found out about man. Can I expect these answers to be scientific answers?
Well, Mr. Smith, it all depends what we call scientific. If we are indeed, if psychiatry and psychoanalysis and psychology is a science, it's a very young science, which can really not compare itself with physics at the present day. And aside from being a young science, also it probably has still to devise its own methods. Because as soon as we are dealing with something which is alive and which we want to observe as alive, it would change its quality if we force it on the laboratory table and treat it as if it were a thing. But I think at the same time, psychology is indeed scientific inasmuch as there are psychologists who have a scientific attitude, who want to observe things objectively, who want to see them as they are, rather than to see them as they wish them to be, or not to see them if they are afraid them to be in a certain way.
If I can ask just one more question before we come into the nature of man. Are these discoveries that psychiatry is finding out about the nature of man and his needs, are they new discoveries?
Well, paradoxically enough, they are terribly old. I think, at least as I see man and his nature, the discoveries which we can make scientifically or psychologically today really amount to the same discoveries and to the establishment of the same norms which have been established by the great teachers of the human race 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago, the great norms of humanism, which were postulated in so diverse parts of the earth.
A remarkable consistency among the men of insight, now detailed through scientific evidence.
Yes.
Well, now if we can come to the nature of man and his needs. What do you see the needs of man as being?
Well, there I should like to make first a kind of negative statement. Because today, still, as we were accustomed to in the 19th century, many people, especially psychologists, but the average person too, thinks that the main needs of men are either of a material nature, that is to say, needs of food and material things, or as Freud and many of his followers have postulated, of an instinctual need, nature, the sexual needs, instinctive needs. Now, it's perfectly true that man could not live if he didn't eat and drink and sleep. Actually, nobody has ever died from non-satisfaction of sexual needs, but still that is an important need too. But this is only a condition, but not a sufficient condition for man to be happy and not even to be sane. That is to say, even if all instinctive and material needs of man were fulfilled, this is not a condition for happiness and sanity, because man is a very unique creature, a very unique organism, with needs which spring from the very uniqueness and peculiarity of his human existence.
Human
and these needs
in addition.
are human needs indeed, which need to be fulfilled.
Well, the others, I think, are obvious. You've mentioned those, but now on to these human needs. What do you conceive them? What do you think psychiatry is showing to be these specifically human needs, which, as you say, unless these are satisfied, man not only cannot reach his full development, he can't even be sane. Is that right?
I should rather not speak perhaps in the name of psychiatry, because my views on this are a little not quite orthodox enough, but so I speak for myself. Well, I think in the first place, as I said, these needs are to be understood from the specific conditions of human existence. And perhaps I could say a word about this first. Man is a paradox. He is within nature and he transcends nature. He is, you might say, the only organism where life has become aware of itself. He is gifted with imagination, with reason, that is to say, with awareness of his existence, of his death, of all the many choices he has. And therefore, he has a singular and unique problem to solve. And his needs are unique and specifically human, inasmuch as they are rooted in this peculiarity and specificity of his human condition, you might say, of the paradox, which is a human paradox. But to be a little bit more specific, I would say the first human need is that of relatedness. What I mean by this is the following. Man is torn away from nature. He is torn away from the, you might say, primitive harmony which the animal has in its relatedness to nature. He is aware of himself. He needs to relate himself to others, to the world, in some way. Unless, if he cannot relate himself in some way, he is insane. And insanity is indeed to be defined as that condition of man in which he has lost the capacity to relate himself. But he can relate himself in many ways. He can relate himself by submitting to an outside power and feeling himself part and parcel of it. He can relate himself by wishing to have power over somebody who is weaker, and in that way to feel enriched, so to speak, by the weaker person. And he can relate himself by love. That is to say, by the feeling of being one with another person under the condition of being two, of retaining his integrity. And I would say this is the only form of relatedness which corresponds to man's nature, to his dilemma of needing to be himself and needing to be one with others.
He needs to be related to others. There can be wrong ways of relatedness, and submission or domination are examples of such wrong ways.
Yes.
And love would be the example of the
Yes,
right way.
in fact, I'm glad you mentioned this, because I wanted to add, just as one needs to eat in order not to die, One needs to be related, and that holds true from the satisfaction of the other needs I'm talking about, in order not to be insane. But the way in which one fulfills these needs makes a difference not between insanity and not insanity, but between better and worse, between happiness and unhappiness, between mental health and mental illness, although not insanity, which mentally speaking would be the equivalent of death, physically speaking.
Insofar then as a person does relate himself to others, it does try to submit himself to them, and that doesn't mean, that's not the same as serving them, but losing his will and subjugating it or dominating them. To this extent, he would deviate from mental health.
Yes, exactly.
Fine. All right. What other
Well,
need? Relatedness.
I would say the second need is that of rootedness. By this, I am again referring to the basic human condition, namely that the child is rooted in the mother's womb, and the act of birth is the emergence from that womb. Man, as a race, is rooted originally in nature, in the soil, in the ties of blood, and his development, his evolution, is an emergence from these natural roots. Now, as long as the child is the fetus in the womb, or the babe on the breast of mother, or the infant led by her hands, it is secure. And as long as man was rooted in the ties of blood, he is in a way secure too. He has less problems, but he's also undeveloped. In order to develop, he has to be fully born. That is to say, he has to separate himself from these original roots. But he can do so only if he finds new roots, if he finds a new home. And I believe the only human way of solving this problem is if he arrives at the feeling of brotherly love, at the feeling of solidarity with his fellow man, if he succeeds to make this world a truly human home, rather than to fall into the trap of regressing into new ties of the idolatry of blood and soil and race.
Is a matter of geographic extent involved here? If a person were related in brotherly love to his family, that would be too small a group, and this would be a wrong rootedness?
Indeed. I would say unless one can love all men, one loves nobody. Because if one is only loving one's family, it is really an enlarged egotism.
As I get it, then, the difference between rootedness and relatedness speaks to the manner of relationship, and rootedness calls for breadth and scope.
Yes.
Would that be
I
the
think
difference?
that's perfectly true. Of course, the two are very closely related anyway.
Yes. All right. I have two. Are there
Well,
other
could I
needs?
speak about a third need, and that is the one which you might call transcendence. By this, I mean something very special and concrete. Man is a creature. He is thrown into this world without his will and consent, and he goes away from this world without his will and consent, usually, quite accidentally. But having awareness of himself, he is not satisfied with the role of dice thrown out of the cup, with the role of a creature who is just an object. He has a profound need to transcend his role as a creature, to transcend life. And he can do that in two ways. He can do it as being a creator by creating children, by creating ideas, by creating things. That is to say, all this is fulfilled in the realm of art, of science, of all the many cultural activities which man has done. But, if I may add this, creating has certain premises. It needs effort. It needs love. It needs concentration. And many people are inhibited from creating. And then something very paradoxical happens. I can transcend life also by destroying it. If I cannot create, the need for transcendence is transformed into a need for destruction. And indeed, I think we see the very example you mentioned at the beginning today, that the need for destruction becomes terribly strong and intense if the need for creation is not satisfied.
Then destruction really would be the result of unlived life, you might say?
Exactly, I would say that, yes.
Yes. It really is this need to be more than a passive particle, to be an agent and to have one's life count and make a difference in some way. And if it doesn't, if you can't make a difference in a creative, positive way, then you will have a need to make a difference in a destructive way. Would that be right?
Yes, indeed, and I think this is our great problem. If we cannot bring about a world in which the person can be creative, and by that I don't mean that he's an artist, but that he is creative in some manner, then indeed there's nothing left but that men become destructive.
Would this have something to do with juvenile delinquency? I know that's a big issue in itself.
Well, I'm really not a specialist in that, but I would think indeed there are lots of experiences how juvenile delinquents change if they are given a chance to do something productive.
All right. The need then to transcend the state of simple animal passivity and become an active agent.
Yes.
Are there others?
Well, there are really two others I want to mention. The next one is the need to have a sense of identity. Now, again, the sense of identity is related to the basic human situation. Inasmuch as man's life is not determined by instincts, inasmuch he is not an animal, inasmuch he is separate, inasmuch, if I could use the biblical example, he is driven out from paradise. He is aware of himself as he, and he must be able to have a sense of identity. That is to say the word I meaningfully. But if I could add this sense of identity depends a great deal on the social situation. Let us say the primitive tribe, where individualism is not yet developed. The person's sense of identity might be expressed in the formula, I am we. But we have overcome in the last 400 years the situation of even of the medieval culture, in which there was a much greater sense of communal existence. It's not accidental that Descartes had as his main question, who am I? How do I know that I am I? The I became a question in the modern era, in the last 400 years. And again, there are two ways of answering, or of satisfying this quest for a sense of identity. The positive way is that I can really and legitimately say I think, I feel, by which I mean my thought and my feeling originates in myself. It is my activity, genuinely my activity. But if people fail in doing this, then indeed their sense of identity is fulfilled in another manner, namely by conformity. Then they feel I am I inasmuch as I am not different from anybody else. And then they are frightened to death of being different. And I'm afraid that is one of the great troubles of our day. Not that people are so much forced to conform as that they are afraid of not conforming, because they need to have a sense of identity, and in many instances they have only the pseudo sense of identity by conformity, rather than to be able really to say I. It is a strange experiment if you ask somebody, instead of asking him how are you, if you would ask him who are you, and the reaction is sometimes quite startling.
It really is a confusion then between feeling or confusing the need for relatedness with the need for uniformity. And you'd say these are very different things.
Exactly. And perhaps I could add here that I think we have misunderstood a great deal the concept of equality. We mean today very often by equality sameness, as if we had a right to be equals, if we had a right for freedom and independence only if we were not different. While really equality means, I would say in the tradition of Kant, that each person is an end in himself and must never be a means to anybody else, and just under the condition that we are different and not that we are the same.
On this matter of identity, as I understand it, it's this sense of being the agent of my thoughts, my deeds, and you're saying this is very important. How would this relate to an equal value which has often been proposed, that when we have a loss of ourselves, as transcend ourselves, ecstasy actually, doesn't the root come from standing outside ourselves? And aren't there moments of aesthetic seizure, and maybe other kinds too, when we're lifted out and lose all sense of our self and separateness? Are these bad by your criteria?
Well, this is really a difficult question to answer, because we would have to examine the nature of this ecstasy. There is an ecstasy in which I'm out of myself, and there's an ecstasy in which I'm expanding myself, in which I experience myself out of the narrow confines of my separateness, and yet in which there is a sense of I, rather than losing myself into something.
But if you forgot, self-forgetfulness. Now in our tradition, why, this has a kind of virtue. If it were to be complete,
Yes.
though, do you think it would be bad?
Well, I wouldn't say complete. I think it's a qualitative difference. If I'm terribly interested in something, I forget about my hunger, I forget about the noise I hear, and yet I am I, because this I here is the I which is so interested.
Oh, the sense of identity does not involve self-consciousness.
No, on the contrary, I think
Okay.
the stronger, the more secure the sense of
That's where I
identity
was-
is, the more I can forget about myself.
Fine. Now, I think there was one more.
Yes, this I can deal with very briefly. I think we all have a need for a frame of orientation, because we have a mind, we are reflective human beings. We need to have some sense of orientation of what goes on in the world. Now, again, this is a need. If we don't have this sense of frame of orientation, we are insane. But this frame of orientation can be an irrational one, full of illusion, full of fiction, and it can be a rational one, that is to say, a realistic one. And indeed, the history of science and evolution of the human race is one in which this frame of orientation has been approximating more and more reality. The reality of nature, social reality, and the reality within ourselves. In other words, again, I would say, we need some frame of orientation, but we have the choice between one which is relatively approximate to reality and one which is a pipe dream, one which is unrealistic.
Can a person live without a sense of direction?
I don't think so. I think people wouldn't be taken in by so many crazy and foolish and irrational ideas if they could dispense with any idea of what goes on, of what picture they get of the world.
You've given 5 needs of man. Is this an exhaustive list? Is this final? Or
No, Mr. Miss, not at all. In fact, it isn't even a list. These are things which, in my own thinking and observing of what I see of men, have struck me as those which I have observed as the most important ones. But I'm sure there's nothing exhaustive about it, nothing final about it, and in fact I talk about them so simply because I consider them mostly as examples for the kind of need I have in mind we have to discover. But I'm sure there are others, or these can be changed. There is nothing final about it, like in a list of instincts,
Yes.
which we were so accustomed to 30 years ago.
And, but these are all pointing at things which you feel are rooted in the nature of man, and men, whatever their culture, whatever their time, as long as they're human, they have these needs, and their fulfillment depends upon the meeting of these.
Precisely.
Good. Now, can I follow that up by asking, what then would you propose coming out of this list? I know to meet these, but more specifically.
Well, I have to be very brief, although this is a question where one would wish to be very lengthy. I would say this: to really consider what the true needs of men are, the truly human needs, and to differentiate them from the pseudo-needs, which we so often cling to because we think this is human nature.
Now,
And
what are
the-
these? Can you...
Well, everybody knows them. I mean, we have the need for more gadgets, for more consumption, for more power, for more free time, and actually we do everything to save time, and then we are terribly embarrassed we have saved the time because we don't know what to do with it except killing it. And actually, what a person thinks his needs are is not necessarily what they are. It's a notorious fact that there's nothing more deceptive than what people think about themselves. And I would think our aim should be to recognize in the first place what are the true nature, the true needs of man, the objectively valid needs, and not the needs which he thinks, rightly or wrongly, are his needs. And then indeed to go one step further, namely to see that all our civilizations should serve only one aim, namely the aim of further human development, the aim of the fulfillment of these genuine needs of man. Man is not a thing. Man has created many things, but these things have become his master very often, rather than he is the master of things. And I would say the consequence of all this would be put man back into the saddle.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fromm, for these insights into the nature of man and the genuine needs which need to be filled if he is to reach fulfillment. On our next session, Dr. Fromm will be joined by Barbara Ward and Arthur Compton as the three of them consider together the achievement of freedom in the modern world.
This has been Science and Human Responsibility with Dr. Houston Smith. Appearing on this program with Dr. Smith tonight was Dr. Eric Fromm, psychoanalyst and professor at the National University of Mexico. For further information and study of tonight's subject, man's nature and today's problems, we would like to recommend that you read The Art of Loving by Eric Fromm, The Transformation of Man by Lewis Mumford, and The Courage to Be by Paul Tillich. This is National Educational Television.